It seems like every time we turn around, we hear about another family touched by dementia. And unfortunately, it's not just our imagination. Dementia is rising at an alarming rate worldwide. Someone in the world is diagnosed with dementia every 3 seconds, and roughly 55 million people are living with it today. If we do nothing, that number will nearly double every 20 years, reaching about 78 million by 2030 and 139 million by 2050. Closer to home, here in the US, we have around 6 or 7 million seniors with dementia today, and that could climb to 12 million by 2040. These aren't just statistics. They represent our parents, our grandparents, our loved ones. Here's something you might suspect. Dementia disproportionately impacts women. Almost 2/3 of Americans with Alzheimer's, the most common form of dementia, are women. Yes, women not only live longer on average, giving the disease more time to develop, but emerging research is exploring biological and genetic reasons that may put women at higher risk than men. This means you, me, the daughters, the wives, the sisters are more likely to face Alzheimer's ourselves. And on top of that, it's so often women who shoulder the caregiving burden when a family member falls ill. About 2/3 of dementia caregivers are women, and over 1/3 of all dementia caregivers are daughters caring for an aging parent. Let that sink in. The people most at risk of this disease are often the same people stepping up to care for others with it. So, if you're watching this, maybe you are one of those brave caregivers. Maybe you've moved back into your childhood home to take care of mom, or you spend your evenings after work checking in on dad. You are not alone. I recently spoke with a woman who did exactly that. She gave up her career and relocated to care for her mother with dementia full-time. It was exhausting and heartbreaking, but she did it out of love. Stories like hers are playing out everywhere. Alzheimer's takes a devastating toll on caregivers. In fact, caregivers of people with dementia are twice as likely to report substantial emotional, financial, and physical difficulties compared to caregivers of elders without dementia. Think about the emotional strain of watching a parent's memory fade, the physical stress of juggling medications and daily needs, and the financial strain of extra care. It's huge. And speaking of financial toll, dementia can bankrupt families. Professional memory care or nursing home care for dementia is astonishingly expensive. Depending on where you live and the level of care needed, a memory care facility can easily cost $8,000 a month, and high-end facilities can reach $15,000 or $20,000 a month. Yes, per month. I know this sounds unbelievable, but in some areas, even an average nursing home is around that range, and the really nice ones cost even more. Families often end up paying hundreds of thousands of dollars over the course of this illness. In one case, a mother with dementia required 8 years of care in a facility. In total, over $1 million was spent for her care over those years. Now, most of us don't have that much spare money, but even if we did, none of us want to see it drained away along with our loved ones' memories. The average lifetime cost of care for one person with dementia is nearly $400,000. That is borne by families out of pocket. It's no wonder so many families lie awake at night, terrified of what the future could hold. But that's why we are here today. It doesn't have to be this way. Dementia, especially in its early stages, is not a runaway train that we are powerless to stop. We now know there are steps that we can take to prevent cognitive decline and even reverse early-stage dementia symptoms. There is hope. New science, including the breakthrough work of Dr. Bredesen and his RECODE protocol, is showing that we can fight back against this disease. Today, I want to share that knowledge with you. Real, research-backed information about preventing and reversing early dementia. I'm speaking especially to the daughters out there caring for mom or dad. I see you, and I've been there too. But this message is for anyone that wants to protect their brain. We are going to balance the science with some personal stories and practical advice. By the end of this episode, you'll understand why early intervention is absolutely critical. And you'll know exactly why I'm so passionate about this comprehensive approach to brain health. So here's our game plan for the next 30 to 40 minutes. We'll briefly cover what dementia and Alzheimer's are and why your parents' diagnosis might not be a one-size-fits-all thing. Then I'll introduce Dr. Bredesen's approach, why it's different and more promising than the mainstream single drug for a single disease idea. We'll compare this protocol to the latest Alzheimer's drugs you might be hearing about in the news. We'll talk about how to detect problems early, including some cutting-edge tests like the NeuroCode brain scan blood test and genetic testing for Alzheimer's risk. And we'll make the case for investing in preventing now, financially and emotionally, rather than paying the devastating costs later. Finally, I'll leave you with a clear call to action on what you can do today to protect yourself or your loved one. So, grab a cup of tea, take a breath, and let's dive in. There is hope on the horizon. Let's get started with Dementia 101, understanding the enemy. First, let's get clear on what we are dealing with. Dementia is an umbrella term. It's not a single disease, but rather a syndrome, meaning a collection of symptoms that result from damage to the brain. These symptoms typically include memory loss, difficulties with thinking, problem solving or language, and changes in mood or behavior. When someone says dementia, they mean the person has enough cognitive decline that it interferes with daily life. Believe it or not, there are actually over 100 different forms of dementia, each with different underlying causes in the brain. The most common cause of dementia is Alzheimer's disease. In fact, Alzheimer's accounts for 60 to 80% of all dementia cases. So most likely, if your parent has dementia, it's Alzheimer's, though we should not ignore the other types. The second most common is vascular dementia, which often happens after strokes or due to chronic small blood vessel disease in the brain. Alzheimer's and vascular dementia together make up as much as 90% of dementia cases. Often they occur together as a mixed dementia. Other types you might have heard of include Lewy body dementia, which is associated with Parkinsonian symptoms and vivid hallucinations, frontotemporal dementia, which tends to hit at a younger age and affects personality and language more than memory early on. Each type has unique features. For example, Alzheimer's typically starts with short-term memory loss and disorientation. Lewy body dementia might start with visual hallucinations and motor issues. Frontotemporal dementia might start with odd behavior or language trouble. But in practice, the boundaries between these types can blur. Many people have mixed pathologies like Alzheimer's changes plus some vascular damage. Think of it this way. Dementia is the syndrome and Alzheimer's is the leading cause of that syndrome. Like the biggest slice of the pie. When doctors diagnose Alzheimer's disease, it means they believe the dementia symptoms are primarily due to the classic Alzheimer's process in the brain, the buildup of sticky amyloid plaques and tangles of tau protein that damage and kill neurons. This process tends to start insidiously, maybe 10 to 20, even 30 years before symptoms, and gradually erodes memory and cognition. By the time we see this memory loss, the brain has already been under attack for years by these plaques and tangles. No wonder drugs that try to intervene late haven't been very effective, and we'll get to that in a bit. So, to recap, if your mom or dad has been told they have dementia, odds are it's Alzheimer's-driven dementia, especially if they're over 65. If they had lots of small strokes or cardiovascular issues, vascular dementia could be a factor. If they started showing symptoms in their 50s or early 60s, we might consider frontotemporal dementia or even a rare early onset Alzheimer's gene. More on genetics in a little bit. So knowing the type of dementia does matter because it can guide what interventions might help most. However, no matter what the type, there's a crucial concept here. cognitive decline is usually multifactorial. There are many things contributing to why the brain is deteriorating. And that's a perfect seg into Dr. Dale Bredesen's work because he zeroed in on that idea. Before we move on, I want to emphasize, understanding dementia isn't just an academic exercise. When we understand what is happening in the brain, we can better target why it's happening and how to slow or stop it. So let's talk about a paradigm shift in understanding Alzheimer's disease itself. Alzheimer's is not one disease. So enter Dr. Dale Bredesen. He's a neurologist and researcher who has spent decades studying neurodegenerative diseases. He's been at institutions like UCLA and the Buck Institute for Research on Aging. If you haven't heard his name before, you might have heard of his best-selling book, The End of Alzheimer's, or the RECODE program. His work is controversial to some in the traditional neurology community, but it's also incredibly hopeful and increasingly supported by science. By the way, he has a new book coming out this month called The Ageless Brain. Be sure to check it out. It's on neurodegeneration, including how misunderstandings of the disease have hindered our efforts to treat it, as well as a preventative program. And I'll go into the detail of that program in a little bit, that readers of all ages can put into practice to optimize their cognitive health now and sustain it for years to come. So what makes Dr. Bredesen's perspective different? Well, for one, he looked at the huge variability in Alzheimer's patients and said, what if Alzheimer's isn't just one thing? We've long thought of it as one disease caused by amyloid plaques, and the pharma industry has been laser focused on drugs to remove amyloid. But patients present differently. Some have more inflammation, some have more metabolic issues, some lose memory first, others lose language first. Dr. Bredesen suspected Alzheimer's represents multiple subtypes of disease processes. And he was right. Research now confirms that Alzheimer's disease, long thought to be a single illness, actually consists of different subtypes. In one early study, Dr. Bredesen's team identified a few different subtypes. I think they started with 3 in the beginning. And as research progressed, this has expanded, and we sometimes now talk about 5 to 6 subtypes, including an insulin-resistant subtype, a toxic exposure subtype, and so on. For example, one subtype is driven by inflammation, which is sometimes called type 1 or inflammatory Alzheimer's, where markers like C-reactive protein are high. Another is non-inflammatory or atrophic, where there isn't obvious inflammation, but there are hormonal and trophic deficiencies. Essentially, the brain isn't getting the nutritional support it needs. A third subtype identified was a toxic or a cortical type, which often affected relatively younger individuals, where toxic exposures like mold, for instance, or vascular factors may play a big role. The key point is each variation might need a different treatment approach. What helps one person might not fully help another if their Alzheimer's has a different root cause. Dr. Bredesen uses a powerful analogy. Imagine your brain's health is like a roof with 36 holes in it. If you only patch one hole, you'll still get rained on because you haven't fixed all the different leaks. Treating Alzheimer's is like repairing a roof with 36 holes. You can't just plug one hole and expect the problem to be solved. In other words, you can't just take one pill and think you've beaten this complex disease. Why 36? It's a symbolic number representing dozens of factors, from insulin resistance to nutrient deficiencies to chronic infections. They can all punch holes in your brain's roof, eventually leading to cognitive decline. The conventional approach has often been one drug, aiming at one target, like amyloid. But if Alzheimer's is a multifaceted network problem, then a single target drug is like bailing water on a sinking boat without plugging the leaks. In scientific terms, Dr. Bredesen refers to Alzheimer's as a network insufficiency. By that, he means the brain's neuronal network is failing, not because of one isolated trigger, but because of an insufficiency in a broad network of needs. For example, neurons might be dying because they aren't getting enough trophic support from hormones, nutrients, and growth factors, and because they're under attack from inflammation, and because toxins have accumulated all at the same time. In his view, Alzheimer's is essentially the result of a perfect storm of metabolic and toxic insults that overwhelm the brain's ability to function. And guess what? A growing body of research agrees. Epidemiological, genetic, and biochemical studies have concluded that Alzheimer's represents a complex network insufficiency, not a simple one-cause disease. This is radically different from the one disease, one cause model. It explains why drug after drug in clinical trials have failed to cure or even significantly slow Alzheimer's. They've been aiming at one target, like clearing amyloid or boosting one neurotransmitter, while the disease process has dozens of other pathways still wreaking havoc. As one major review puts it, a single drug approach may slightly delay progression, slightly, but it has not prevented or reversed cognitive decline in Alzheimer's to date. On the other hand, strategies that address multiple factors simultaneously, diet, exercise, sleep, vitamins, hormones, inflammation, etc., are showing far more promise. So Dr. Bredesen built a framework to evaluate and address all these factors. This became the Bredesen Protocol, now often delivered as RECODE, which stands for Reversal of Cognitive Decline. The philosophy is simple. Identify all the contributors to a person's cognitive decline, all the holes in the roof, and address as many as possible in a personalized way. Instead of prescribing a drug to temporarily boost memory while the disease marches on, the protocol digs for root causes. What's the person's diet and insulin resistance status? Do they have nutrient deficiencies like low B12 or low vitamin D? Are their hormones for thyroid, estrogen, testosterone, progesterone, are they optimal or are they low? Do they have chronic inflammation from infections like Lyme disease or gum disease or perhaps an autoimmune issue? How's their stress and sleep? Are they sleeping deeply or struggling with apnea? What toxins have they been exposed to? Mercury from fish or dental fillings, mold in a water-damaged home, pollution in the air? The protocol even looks at psychosocial factors. What about mental health and social engagement? Depression and isolation can accelerate cognitive decline. So all of these factors and more contribute to the progression and severity of Alzheimer's disease. No surprise then that increasing evidence supports holistic lifestyle changes, not just as prevention, but as part of treatment. In fact, research shows that interventions focusing on diet, exercise, stress reduction, sleep optimization, and brain training can improve cognitive function or slow the decline. One study might target insulin resistance by cutting out sugar and adding intermittent fasting. Another might target inflammation by identifying a hidden infection and treating it. The big picture is that a personalized, multi-therapeutic program based on each individual's unique risk factors and biochemistry may be far more effective than any monotherapy. To put it succinctly, Dr. Bredesen's RECODE protocol is about root causes. Traditional approaches have been about symptom management, for example, giving a memory pill that boosts neurotransmitters to temporarily help memory without changing the course of the disease. RECODE flips that. It's about altering the underlying course of the disease by removing the things harming the brain and adding the things that help the brain. Rather than viewing Alzheimer's as an untreatable genetic fate or just bad luck, it views it as potentially multiple reversible syndromes. This approach treats Alzheimer's not as a strictly incurable pathology, but as a dysfunction that can be tackled, at least in the early stages, by giving the brain what it needs to heal. Let me be clear, this is not a miracle cure or some anecdotal fad. It's an approach grounded in the latest science of metabolism and neurology. It's precision medicine for the brain. And importantly, it's showing results that no drug has ever achieved. That brings us to our next section. How does RECODE actually stack up against the Alzheimer's drugs out there? And why do I often say that current FDA-approved drugs, at best, offer marginal improvements. Let's compare. So let's look at RECODE protocol versus the Alzheimer's drugs. Why not just take a pill, right? If you or your parent has been diagnosed with Alzheimer's or even mild cognitive impairment, you've probably heard of drugs like Aricept, Namenda, Leqembi, or the latest, Kisunla. It seems like every few months there's a headline about a breakthrough Alzheimer's drug. So you might wonder, why not just take the medication? Why bother with this complicated sounding lifestyle program? It's a fair question. Let's talk about what current drugs do and do not do. The older class of drugs like Aricept, Exelon, Namenda mostly aim to boost neurotransmitters in the brain like acetylcholine or modulate glutamate. They can give a temporary bump in cognitive function or slow decline for a while, but they do not stop the disease. Think of those drugs like putting a slightly stronger battery in a failing flashlight. It might shine a bit brighter for a short time, but it isn't fixing the frayed wiring, causing the light to dim. There is some symptomatic relief, but the underlying neurodegeneration marches on. Then there are the new drugs. Aduhelm, which actually got discontinued in 2024 due to microbleeds in the brain in many cases. Leqembi and Kisunla, these target the amyloid plaques. These are antibodies that bind to amyloid in the brain to help clear it out. The hope was that removing plaques would halt the disease. The reality is, these drugs do reduce amyloid plaques on scans, but the clinical benefit is extremely modest. For example, one of the recent trials for an anti-amyloid drug showed no actual improvement in memory or thinking. Patients still got worse, just a little bit slowly. Leqembi's trial showed about a 27% slowing in the rate of decline. To put that in perspective, if a placebo patient declined by 12 points on a cognitive test in 18 months, a Leqembi patient declined by about 9 points. They still declined, just slightly lesser so. No current drug has shown patients getting back cognitive abilities or even staying stable long-term. So at best, we are talking a slight delay in worsening. In fact, Aduhelm, the first FDA-approved Alzheimer's drug that specifically targeted amyloid beta plaques, was so controversial as it was approved despite very unclear evidence of benefit. It can clear amyloid, yes, but whether it truly helps patients live better or longer was questionable. Meanwhile, these drugs can have significant side effects. For these amyloid antibodies, brain swelling and hemorrhages show up in a notable percentage of patients on MRI scans. They also come with an astronomical price tag. Think $26,000 per year for Leqembi, not counting infusion costs and MRIs needed to monitor safety. So we have drugs that may slow decline a bit, but come with risks and huge costs. No drug on the market has reliably reversed Alzheimer's or even halted it. In fact, over the past couple of decades, over 400 clinical trials for Alzheimer's have failed to produce a cure or even a highly effective therapy. The few that got approved, like memantine, just managed symptoms temporarily. Now contrast that with what we are seeing from comprehensive approaches like RECODE. Dr. Bredesen's initial case studies were astonishing. Back in 2014, he reported the first examples ever of reversal of cognitive decline in Alzheimer's patients. These were small studies, just a handful of patients, but they showed measurable improvement in memory and function with a personalized multifactorial program. In subsequent years, he and other physicians kept refining the protocol and documenting patient outcomes. By 2018, Bredesen published a report of 100 patients who showed documented improvements in cognition using the RECODE approach. Some of these were people with mild Alzheimer's or MCI, mild cognitive impairment, who improved their cognitive assessment scores by 12 points, essentially going from clearly impaired to normal range. Patients showed better brain EEGs. Some even showed increases in hippocampal volume on MRI, meaning their shrunken memory center regrew to an extent. This was unheard of at the time. Remember, Alzheimer's is supposed to be progressive and one way. To see people actually regain cognitive function was like seeing stage 4 cancer go into remission. It gave a lot of us in the field real hope. Skeptics said, well, these are just case series, not randomized trials. And that was true. Up until recently, we didn't have a randomized controlled trial of the Bredesen protocol. In the last few years, a precision medicine approach to Alzheimer's disease was published in a prestigious journal. It was essentially a trial of a Bredesen-style protocol. They don't use the brand name, but it's the same approach. Identify each person's drivers of cognitive decline and address them. They took 25 patients with early Alzheimer's or MCI and treated them for 9 months with a comprehensive personalized plan. Dietary changes, exercise, sleep optimization, supplements, removing toxins, the whole works. The results? 84%, 21 out of 25 patients improved their cognition. They didn't just decline slower, they actually got better on objective cognitive tests. One patient stayed about the same, so 4% of the group, and only 3 patients continued to decline despite the protocol, which is about 12%. Let's compare that to drug trials. In a typical drug trial, 100% of patients on placebo decline and 100% on drug decline, in this case for the Alzheimer's drugs, just a tad slower. In this trial, however, the majority improved. In fact, on average, patients' cognitive testing scores jumped from the 38th percentile to the 63rd percentile for their age. That's like taking someone from below average back to above average for their age, a 66% improvement in performance. And here's more, they also tracked MRI brain scan changes. Normally, Alzheimer's patients' brains shrink significantly each year. In this study, the expected brain volume loss was largely stopped. Instead of losing about 2.2% of gray matter volume, on average, patients actually gained 0.3% over the 9 months. In the memory center, the hippocampus, the shrinkage rate improved by 63%. In plain English, their brains physically atrophied much less than usual, some even showing signs of growth or recovery. This has never been seen with any drug. One of the lead physicians, Dr. Kat Toops, commented that in her 20-plus years running drug trials for dementia, the best they ever hoped for was a slight slowing of decline, never improvement. She said that this trial was the first she's seen where patients actually got better in multiple domains of function and even their MRI scans improved. I get goosebumps sharing that because it truly marks a turning point. Proof of concept that Alzheimer's can be reversed in its early stages if you tackle the root causes. Now, to be fair and scientific, this was a small study and it was a single-arm trial. Everyone got the treatment, so it wasn't placebo-controlled due to the personalized nature. Critics will rightly point out we need larger, longer trials, ideally randomized, to fully convince the broader medical community. So there is actually another trial that is currently underway at 6 different clinical sites in the US with up to 87 participants. It's called Evanthia, and I can't wait to see the results of it. But for now, the evidence we have, combined with loads of patient experiences, suggests that a comprehensive approach yields far better outcomes than any single drug has delivered. So, if a comprehensive protocol is so great, why isn't every neurologist prescribing it? Several reasons. 1. It's hard. It takes time and effort from both patient and the doctor to do this. It's much simpler in the short run to write a prescription than to manage 36 variables like diet, sleep, etc. The medical system simply isn't well set up for intensive lifestyle modifications. 2. There's skepticism. It sounds too good to be true, and until recently, the evidence was mostly just case studies. 3. Pharma influence and the inertia of the current paradigm. Many doctors simply haven't been exposed to this different approach, or they've heard it's fringe. But that is changing as the evidence grows. The bottom line for you watching this: don't rely on a pill as your salvation. By all means, if your parents' doctor or your doctor prescribes donepezil or memantine, these can be okay to try. They might give a temporary boost or slow decline a bit, and they're generally safe. The new anti-amyloid antibodies, they might slightly slow progression in certain individuals, though with risks and huge costs. But no drug will rescue cognitive function or address the many underlying problems fueling the dementia. Only a broad, personalized prevention and reversal strategy like RECODE or similar multi-domain programs can do that. And as we've seen, such programs are already showing people can actually improve, not just decline more slowly. Imagine having your mom gain independence back, or your dad remember things more clearly again, not just decline slightly less. That's what gets me so excited about this approach. We are moving from a paradigm of managing decline to one of regaining brain health. It's a total game changer. Now I want to talk about the next thing that I'm super passionate about, which is early detection. Don't wait until it's too late. So there's an important catch with this whole thing that I'm telling you about. The earlier you intervene, the better, right? Alzheimer's and dementia don't suddenly pop up overnight. They brew under the surface for years, even decades. By the time someone has noticeable memory loss, a lot of damage has already been done in the brain. The encouraging results we just discussed were mostly in early-stage patients, people with mild cognitive impairment or early dementia. There's a reason for that. Once the disease is very advanced, it's much harder to reverse. Neurons have died and the brain has shrunk significantly. So our mission should be catch it early, act early. Ideally, prevent it before it ever reaches the dementia stage. You might wonder, how can I catch it early? What tests exist? The good news is we live in a time of incredible advances in dementia diagnostics. We can now detect signs of Alzheimer's years before symptoms and do it with simple methods like blood tests and genetic tests, not only expensive PET scans or invasive spinal taps. One of the newest tools I'm really excited about is the brain scan by RECODE, often just called brain scan. Despite its name, it's actually a blood test, so no MRI machine is needed. This test measures 3 key biomarkers in your blood. So blood taken simply from your vein will test for 3 things: p-tau 217, NFL or neurofilament light, and GFAP or GFAP. So let me break those down quickly and explain why they matter. P-tau 217 is a form of tau protein that correlates very closely with the Alzheimer's disease process. When tau in the brain starts to misform and form tangles, which is the hallmark of Alzheimer's, fragments like p-tau 217 show up in the bloodstream. A high p-tau 217 in the blood is highly predictive of amyloid plaque in the brain and future cognitive decline. In fact, the brain scan's p-tau 217 test can detect Alzheimer's pathology in pre-symptomatic people with about 95% accuracy in predicting amyloid positivity. This is astounding. It's as good as some spinal fluid tests, but just from a simple blood sample. This means we can see Alzheimer's coming years in advance by detecting the molecular signs. The second test is neurofilament light, or NFL, which is a marker of neuronal damage. The neurofilament light is bits of scaffolding of neurons that get released when neurons are injured or dying. It's not specific to Alzheimer's, actually. It can be high in any neurodegenerative condition or even after a head injury, but it tells you something is wrong. Elevated NFL might indicate ongoing damage from causes like small strokes, vascular issues, trauma, or fast-progressing dementia. In our roof analogy, NFL tells us if there are a lot of leaks causing damage, though it won't tell us the exact cause of the leak. In combination with the other markers, though, it's very useful to know what's happening in the brain. The third marker is GFAP, glial fibrillary acidic protein. This is a marker of brain inflammation and repair. GFAP comes from astrocytes, which are support cells in the brain that often ramp up when there's injury or inflammation. Elevated GFAP can be an early sign that the brain is reacting to some pathology even before neurons die. It's like an alarm signal that there's an insult. It could be amyloid starting to accumulate or other injury, and the brain's immune cells are responding. So the brain scan combines these three to give an evaluation of your Alzheimer's disease risk years before any memory loss. It's actually being touted as the first widely available Alzheimer's blood test for consumers. It's sensitive enough that it could potentially replace the need for invasive spinal taps or $5,000 PET scans to detect amyloid. This is democratizing early detection. If you're 45 or 50 and have a parent with Alzheimer's, I would actually say if you're even younger, if you're 40 and have a parent with Alzheimer's, you could go get a brain scan blood test and see if you have any early signs brewing and then do something about it proactively. Now, another key piece of early detection is genetic testing, specifically ApoE genotype testing. You might have heard of the ApoE gene in relation to Alzheimer's. It's often called the Alzheimer's gene, especially the variant known as ApoE4. Here's the scoop. ApoE4 is not a guarantee you'll get Alzheimer's, but it can increase your risk for it. There are three common versions of the ApoE gene: E2, E3, and E4. ApoE3 is neutral. Most people do have that. ApoE2 is actually protective. ApoE4 is the one that increases risk. If you inherit one copy of ApoE4 from one parent, so your E3, E4 for example, your risk of Alzheimer's is roughly 2 to 3 times higher than someone with no ApoE4. If you inherit two copies, one from each parent, making you E4, E4, which only about 1 to 2% of people are, your risk can be 8 to 12 times higher than someone with no E4. To put that in lifetime risk terms, an ApoE44 person has been estimated to have an up to 60% chance of developing Alzheimer's by age 85. That is not a certainty. Notice, even with two copies, some people, which is the remaining 40%, do not get it by 85. So environmental and lifestyle factors still matter hugely. ApoE4 also tends to make Alzheimer's onset earlier on average. E4 carriers might develop symptoms in their late 60s or early 70s versus 80s for others. So why test your ApoE gene? Some people fear knowing. They say, if I'm ApoE4, do I really want to know? I can't change my genes. While that is true, you can't change your genes, but knowledge is power. If I know I have an ApoE4, I'm going to be extremely proactive about prevention decades in advance. Also, if someone is having memory issues, knowing they carry ApoE4 strengthens the suspicions that perhaps it's something to be concerned about as opposed to just temporary brain fog. On the flip side, if a person with memory loss has no ApoE4, it does not rule out Alzheimer's. Plenty of Alzheimer's patients are not ApoE4 carriers, but it might prompt looking extra hard for other causes too. Maybe it's vascular, or often it's toxins like mold or heavy metals or environmental toxins. Perhaps more importantly, ApoE4 positive individuals respond especially well to preventative strategies. Since they are at higher risk, they have more to gain by making changes. I often tell patients having ApoE4 is not a destiny. Many ApoE4 carriers live long, cognitively healthy lives if they maintain a brain-healthy lifestyle. Conversely, people with no ApoE4 are definitely not off the hook. They can and do get Alzheimer's. Over half of Alzheimer's patients do not have ApoE4. Now, aside from ApoE, there's also early onset Alzheimer's genes like presenilin and APP mutations, but those are extremely rare. They account for maybe 1% of cases and usually cause Alzheimer's in someone's 30s, 40s, or 50s. These are deterministic genes, so if you have the mutation, it becomes harder to prevent that disease. So if your parent or multiple family members got Alzheimer's at a very young age, a genetic counselor might discuss testing for these deterministic genes. But for the vast majority of people, late onset Alzheimer's, which is after 65, is what we're dealing with. And that's polygenic, which means many genes contribute to that, with ApoE4 being the strongest single risk gene. So in practice, for early detection and risk assessment, I encourage getting an ApoE genetic test, and it can be done through a doctor's labs or even services like 23andMe. And I strongly encourage looking into those new blood biomarker tests like neurocodes, brain scan, or similar panels that include p-tau, etc., especially if you're middle-aged or older with any family history or concerns. Even an MRI of the brain in midlife to check for any early atrophy patterns can be useful, though blood tests might catch changes even earlier than an MRI would show shrinkage. So why am I harping on early detection? Because of what we just discussed. Intervening early can literally change the trajectory of this disease. We have a slogan in our field: when it comes to dementia, forewarned is forearmed. If you know years in advance that you have a risk of cognitive decline, you can implement the RECODE protocol or similar interventions and potentially never progress to full-blown dementia. It's like knowing you have high cholesterol and high blood pressure. You'd want to change your diet and take measures before you have a heart attack, right? If your p-tau 217 is creeping up and your ApoE4 positive, you can take action now to hopefully avoid ever getting symptoms. And if your parent already has early symptoms, early detection still matters. Get a thorough workup. Make sure the doctor checks things like B12, thyroid, to rule out other contributors. And consider getting these new biomarker tests to confirm its Alzheimer's pathology. That can guide you to programs like RECODE sooner rather than wandering through years of mystery about what's causing the memory loss. In short, we don't want to stick our heads in the sand. With the tools available today, genetic tests, cutting-edge blood tests, cognitive assessments, we can see dementia coming and act early. So now we get to the other big thing with dementia is the financial argument, whether you should invest now or wait until later when it might be a little late. So we've talked a lot about health and science, but let's now return to the financial reality for a minute. I opened this talk mentioning how memory care can cost 10 to 20K a month and drain our life savings. It's a grim reality. Dementia doesn't just steal memories, it can steal your family's financial security. But this unfortunate truth can actually be flipped into a motivation for prevention. Consider this. The average memory care facility in the US might be, let's say, 6 to 8K a month, which is about $80,000 a year. But in many areas and for higher levels of care, it's well over $100,000 a year. Some nursing homes charge $20,000 or more per month for dementia care in certain regions. And if you need around-the-clock in-home care, that can be even more expensive, right? Because 24/7 care often requires multiple caregivers working shifts. So unless somebody is extremely wealthy or has long-term care insurance that covers a lot, and even those usually don't cover everything, you're looking at a massive out-of-pocket burden. The lifetime cost of care for one person with dementia is about $350,000 to $400,000 on average in today's dollars, and much of that is borne by families. Many spend far more if the person lives longer with the disease. I know families who have spent their entire retirement funds on caring for a spouse with Alzheimer's, essentially one illness wiping out the entire nest egg. Now let's compare that to the cost of preventative care and coaching. Eating a healthy diet, doing exercise, those have some cost, like quality food, maybe a gym membership or some home equipment, but nowhere near 6 figures. The more substantial cost might be if you are doing a personalized program like the one my team offers to guide you through the RECODE protocol. But here's the thing, for less than the price of 1 month in a memory care facility, you can fund an entire year of a personalized prevention program. Think about that. Instead of $15,000 to $20,000 disappearing in a single month while a parent is in a memory care unit, That same amount could provide a whole year of intensive medical visits, medical oversight, testing, supplements, coaching, basically everything needed to implement the RECODE protocol for your parent or for yourself. When you're considering the finances, also consider the intangible costs that you avoid by preventing dementia. The emotional cost to the family, the lost productivity if an adult child has to quit their job to become a full-time caregiver, the toll on the caregiver's health. Caregivers often develop their own serious health issues from chronic stress. There's even research showing caregivers of people with dementia have higher rates of illness and mortality themselves because of the strain. Avoiding or delaying your loved one's decline also avoids those cascade costs. One more angle. If you're midlife and worried about your future risk, perhaps because you have an ApoE4 gene or strong family history, investing in prevention might mean you don't become a financial burden on your children down the line. I know that's a motivator for a lot of parents. I don't want my kids to have to pay for an expensive nursing home or to give up their careers to take care of me. So by taking action now, you are potentially sparing your family enormous future expenses and tough decisions. To sum it up, committing time, energy, and money now can save your family hundreds of thousands of dollars in long-term care costs, not to mention preserving the quality of life that no amount of money can buy once it's lost. The RECODE protocol and similar programs do require an investment in testing, in medical visits, in coaching, in healthier foods, maybe supplements. But I firmly believe, and I have seen firsthand, that this investment yields returns that dwarf the upfront cost. Think of it as insurance, not in the traditional sense of a policy, but a personal insurance plan you enact through lifestyle to ensure against the worst outcomes. And remember, time is brain and time is money in this disease. Every year you maintain good cognitive function is a year you avoid those huge costs and burdens. So from a purely financial perspective, it makes sense to start early. So what's your next step? You're not just to hope, you have to take action. Right? We've covered a lot of ground today, from the sobering statistics about dementia's rise to the hopeful stories of cognitive improvement to the nitty-gritty of blood tests and lifestyle changes. By now, I hope you feel not only informed but also empowered. This is the moment where knowledge can turn into action. So, here's my message one more time. Early intervention is absolutely key. If there's one thing you take away, let it be that. Whether your parent is already showing signs of memory loss or whether you are simply concerned because it runs in your family, the sooner you start addressing the risk factors, the better the outcome can be. We have a saying, when it comes to brain health, an ounce of prevention is worth a ton of cure. Prevention or early reversal is so much easier than trying to treat late-stage dementia. So let's tilt the odds in our favor now. I want to thank you truly for spending this time with me. I know it's been a lot of information, but I hope it's been enlightening and, more importantly, encouraging. 10 or 20 years ago, a talk like this would have been full of gloom because we just didn't know that reversal was even possible. But today, I get to share a message of hope backed by real science. Dementia can be fought. It can be slowed and even reversed in early stages. And you have more power than you realize to help your loved ones or yourself achieve a better outcome. If you're watching this as a daughter or son of someone suffering, I feel your pain. I've seen it so many times, the worry in families' eyes. But I want you to also feel that spark of hope and empowerment. There are things you can do right now to change the narrative. And you have allies like me and my team who specialize in this, who have walked this road with others and seen success. Early stage dementia does not have to progress inexorably. There is a window of opportunity where the brain can heal, so grab that window now. Your future self and your family will thank you. Thank you for watching. Stay healthy, stay hopeful, and I look forward to speaking with you soon. If you found this episode helpful, please give it a thumbs up and share it with others who might also benefit. Hit subscribe for more empowering brain health content, and as always, leave your questions or experiences in the comments. I do read them and would love to hear your stories or topics you want to hear about. Remember, Alzheimer's is a formidable enemy, but with knowledge, with vigilance, and the right strategy, it's one we can begin to defeat. One brain at a time. Thank you again, and see you next time.